When you can't breathe, you can't scream. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa.
And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is lucky episode 13 of season 7, and today we are continuing our series dedicated to animals and horror. Last week we gave the good doggy Cujo some cuddles, and today we are searching for one big anaconda.
All right. Well, I will kind of get us started on this episode. As Mel said in the introduction there, we are going to be talking about the classic 1997 film Anaconda, starring Jennifer Lopez, Ice Cube, Jon Voight, Eric Stoltz, Owen Wilson. There's several others as well. It was written by Hans Bauer, Jim Cash, Jack Epps Jr., and directed by Luis Llosa. Oh, and I forgot to mention Danny Trejo is also listed as a starring, well, I wouldn't say starring role, but he's listed in the opening credits. This is probably one of his first movie roles outside of Desperado with Robert Rodriguez, but he doesn't really get a lot of screen time, which I'm sure is something we can possibly discuss. But yeah, this movie came out in 1997. It spawned 4 sequels. There's a 2003 sequel, Anacondas, and then there's several more, mostly direct to video: Anaconda 3, Offspring, Anaconda's Trail of Blood. And interestingly enough, I did not know this until we were getting ready for this episode. One of the sequels is Lake Placid versus Anaconda from 2015, which is of course, crossover with the Lake Placid franchise. So that is something that has now been added to my to be watched list, because I'm sure it's terrible, but probably terrible in a really good way. So I guess my initial thoughts on Anaconda, well, I saw this when it came out. I know I did not see it in the theater. I remember renting it and watching it and enjoying it for what it was, a very hard to take movie in a lot of ways. And I don't think I've really seen it since then. My wife and I, actually, when we first met, we kind of bonded over this because she said that this was one of her favorite films. She thought it was a cinematic masterpiece. She uses that with all of the irony and sarcasm that I would as well. So we're on the same page there. But we actually rewatched it together to prepare for this podcast episode. And I was amazed at how much I had forgotten, and how much, and I'm sure we can really dig into this after we kind of get going, but I feel like Jon Voight's character was very problematic, but not for the reasons presented in the movie. He was kind of the antagonist, but that's not really why I found him problematic on watching this in 2023. But yeah, after it came out, it was nominated for 6 Razzies: Worst Actor for Jon Voight, Worst Film, Worst Director. Unfortunately, it lost all 3 of those categories to The Postman, which, if as a side note, if you haven't seen it, I love it, but it's an awful, awful, terrible movie. But I do think it definitely deserved to be nominated for those Razzies. Yeah, I guess my initial thoughts and impressions are, I liked it when it came out, but I mean, I didn't have any high expectations watching it. I loved watching it again. There was a lot I had forgotten about the movie, but it's just a good creature feature, angry, evil animal movie. Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably, I mean, after Cujo, this is probably the next one that would come to mind for me if someone said, "Hey, name some non-supernatural horror movies about animals." This would definitely be one of the first ones that I thought of. So, Mel, Lisa, what are your backgrounds and impressions with Anaconda?
Well, I guess I'll jump in here, Matt. I feel like my impressions are similar to yours. I feel like if I called this a cinematic masterpiece, I would be being sarcastic. I also I am convinced that I watched this movie before, not in the movie theater. I thought I had rented it, but now I'm thinking I might have watched it on TV. But there were a few things from the movie that I was like, yes, I know, I saw this. But like you, I had forgotten a lot. So it wasn't necessarily completely like a first viewing because, like I said, pretty sure I saw it not when it was in the theaters, but afterward. But at the same time, I think that says something about this movie that it was kind of forgettable for me, whether I rented it and saw all of it or watched most of it on when it was on TV. It's an interesting movie. I thought it was fun to watch. I found myself chuckling at some parts. The cast was interesting. It felt 90s to me. I think we talked about that some with our shark attack movies, and our disaster movies that were set around that time. I thought the snake was interesting. I know one of the articles we read said that they wish they had shown less of the snake, kind of like a Jaws thing. And I agree. I feel like even though it was like fun as a creature feature, almost like funny kind of thing to see the snake's body, and some of the fast movements were just interesting from, like, I guess, the action point of view. Seeing it so much, I don't know. There were times when it felt very snake-like to me, and there were times where I was like, "Yes, I could totally tell this is CGI and or robot." Also, I think I texted you this, Lisa. I had no idea until I watched this movie that snakes could scream. Of course, I never set a snake on fire before, so maybe they would if one did that. But the screeching and the screaming and the shrieking was funny and kind of verging on annoying, and really kind of, I don't know how you would do it with a creature feature. You've got to have the monster growling or something, but at the same time, it kind of, like, I just found myself kind of chuckling every time that happened. I'm not sure that that's what they were going for in those scenes. I think they wanted you to be terrified, and instead of any sort of like hissing or whatever, it seemed to be shrieking. And I have to say, Lisa, your impression of that before we started was, it brought me right back to the trauma of witnessing it in the movie. So yeah, that's my initial take. I was pleased that people survived. It wasn't a complete bloodbath, and the end was kind of wild. But yeah, I guess that's where I'll stop with my impressions. I felt like it's a fun movie to watch. I wish I'd watched it with other people like you did, Matt. But I think it's kind of maybe forgettable. Except I'm not sure this time if I'll forget the shrieking snake at this point. Lisa, what's your history with this movie? If we can use
Well,
that term for it.
I have memories. Not well. I don't. This is one of those things that I was trying to think back because I know I saw this in the theater. I know I did, but I don't remember my impressions of the movie. Like, I don't remember thinking, "Oh, this is a terrible movie," and I also don't remember thinking this was like a great movie either, or even being scared. I just remember seeing it. But I saw a lot of movies around that time. I also, funny enough, do remember seeing The Postman in theaters. I know, Matt, you were saying that this had lost out to The Postman on a bunch of the worst film Razzies, and that makes sense because I do have memories of The Postman being a terrible film, and just like leaving that movie theater thinking that was not good. But I don't remember having that feeling with Anaconda, but I also don't remember loving it either. Funny enough, the one thing I really do remember when I was rewatching it, and I will say I have not watched it since I saw it in the theater. So that this was my second viewing of it, and it's been a few decades. But I remember them talking about the horrors of everything that's out there. This is before the snake actually attacks. This movie, for being a short movie, there's a long time before we actually see the snake. Like, I feel like it was like 40 minutes into the film before you ever actually see anything. And so there's other things going on. But I remember when they're sitting there on the boat talking about like what's going on in in the Amazon and all the scary things that can kill you. And they talk about that one. I don't know if it's a fish now or a bug, but the thing that can like swim up your urethra. I had very vivid memories of being like scarred by that when I saw that in the theater. So I mean, I'm assuming that's a real thing. I don't know. I don't care to know if it is or not. It's like nightmarish enough, but I do remember that from the film. So that's something that like when I watched it again, I thought, oh, that's where that particular nightmare came from. That
I
that was
also
it.
remembered that part. Yeah. I was like,
It
yeah, I know I saw that.
and honestly, like I can't decide what I want this movie to be because part of me loves that it is kind of a B movie creature feature and like it's so bad it's good. Like it's enjoyable to watch. Once you get into the animatronic snake part of the film, it is so ridiculous because there's points leading up to the climax of the film where they're fighting the snake and the snake is not acting like any snake I've ever seen in my life. At all. And I've seen a lot because I lived down for a while near like the swamps of Mississippi and Louisiana and we saw a lot of crazy things. But like it would react to them almost like it had emotions or I don't know, like the way it would look in its face. It was I can't even describe it. It's wild, but that part was fun. But part of me also kind of wished they hadn't shown so much of the snake that we just got like slithers in the shadows. I think that would have been scarier. I also think if they had played up more about what could really go wrong in this world, like this idea of wilderness horror, which we've talked about on the podcast before. But, when you're out there really with nobody to rescue you if something happens and there's no way to call for help or there's no way to get somebody to help you. That if they had played with more of those things, I think it would have been a very scary film. As it stands, it's just kind of fun B horror, which I'm fine with. But I don't know that those are my thoughts on the film.
I think you're right about playing up some of the things of being the wilderness horror aspect because the movie it like gestures towards them here and there like with when Eric Stoltz's character is stung by the wasp and has the allergic reaction and there's this race to get him to the hospital that doesn't feel very hurried. Like they keep like John Voight keeps saying, well, we can lose 2 days of travel if we turn around, or we can keep going forward and here's a shortcut. But like they don't really explore that beyond the fact that like they show some shots of Eric Stoltz lying asleep on a bed on a cot inside the boat and like things like that they mention that they're running low on fuel, that they only have like one drum left at one point, which is enough for one more day's worth of the journey before they run out of fuel. But none of those things ever felt really pressing in the way that they should be if this were happening in real life and not in a movie. I mean, if somebody I had been working with and traveling with was in danger to the point where they had an emergency tracheotomy and was in danger of dying from this, I mean, I feel like that is a horror. And like you said, there's so many things that can go wrong when you're stranded and alone in the wilderness, and that's literally what they are. It's several people on a boat going down a river in the rainforest. I mean, they're completely alone, and in some ways subject to the mercy of Cerrone, that John Voight's character, who is trying to manipulate them into going into the Anaconda territory. But it never really embraces any of those things, and I agree. I don't feel like it's a full detraction of the movie because, like you said, as it is, it's a very good B movie. But if they had really explored that, I would love to see that redone by like more serious, more capable hands, if that makes sense.
I felt like I felt more pressure than the people who are actually experiencing this. Like, because I'm like, what are you still going? How many days has it been since this dude needed a hospital? And every time they went in the water, the fear was always a snake. It wasn't a jaguar or a piranha or leeches or the fish that could get you. Like you said, Matt, the wasp was good, but every time like a pressure point was put on them, they didn't really like they reacted, but they also didn't. And so I felt like I was like feeling suspenseful, like because they weren't, if that makes sense. Like I would be taken out of the movie slightly because I'd be like, is dude okay? Who's lying on the bed? They're not going to hospital. And I understand they were being taken hostage by this poacher guy, but yeah, it was all, I don't know, for a movie that supposedly had a clock on it and they were in a dangerous place, they're really, as long as they stayed away from the animatronic snake, things weren't that bad. And the fuel thing, I started taking notes on that as I was watching the movie, because you're right, they say we only have one drum. I felt like they went farther than they could have on that. And then, even though they know there's another snake that could get there after they shoot the one snake in the head, they stop at the warehouse thing that has obviously been attacked by some large animal to get fuel. And then, of course, the whole in catastrophe happens, and we can talk about that later. But they literally have, they killed the snake at that. Well, they didn't kill the snake completely, but they start to kill the snake, I guess you would say, by setting all the fuel in this place on fire. Like, I'm no scientist, but as far as I know, if you pour fuel all over the place in a building that has drums of fuel in it, and then you let it on fire to kill a gigantic snake that sometimes seemed to be bigger or smaller than it was, I'm not sure, like throughout the movie, I would assume those drums would also blow up. Maybe I'm wrong, but I would assume that it's possible that you have, and everything's on fire too. And yet the two, the film director and the cameraman, who are like best friends from the time they were childhood, they're like, let's go back into this burning building and get these drums of fuel out so we can go home. And I'm like, seriously? Like, how are they going to get the drums? If the drums are still okay, how are they going to get them to the burning building? I don't know. It was, so there were things like that. Like you said, I felt like inside there should be a ticking clock on this, but there was just a lot of scenery chewing and debating and thought process. And then all of a sudden it'd be like, oh yeah, we told you, 15 minutes ago we needed fuel. We better go try to get some fuel.
It was one of those things, like one of these movies where there didn't seem, you're absolutely right in saying that there didn't seem to be a whole lot of urgency around anything other than the snake when there should have been. And I also kind of want to point, and again, I know this is why I think it does fit into the movie realm so well, because there were some things that were just absolutely laughable, like when they're caring for their friend who has the like makeshift tracheotomy, which is terrifying in and of itself, because he clearly needs a hospital and they should be worried about things with infection and stuff, but he recovers quite well several times. I mean, one, when he jumps in to save the day, like literally out of nowhere, he jumps out of bed to save the day. And then once they kill the snake, he wakes up and seems to be okay, which, I was just like, well, that's very convenient. There was no talk of like, oh, we need to get you to a doctor now, or we need to get you antibiotics or any of that, which was interesting. Also, his whole injury, I guess, if that's what you want to call it, I think this is when it happened. I didn't write it down, Mel, because I was not taking notes on this film on principle. But what I think it was when it was with the wasps. I'm pretty sure they said they weren't poisonous, or maybe it was with the baby snakes. Do y'all remember that?
The
It
wasp
was the baby snakes.
Yeah, the baby snakes were
Okay,
not
it
poisonous.
was
The
the
wasp
baby snake.
was.
But
Yeah.
I'm going to be nitpicky here, but don't they mean venomous?
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
they
Snake would
do.
be venomous. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that was one of those things where I was like, guys, you had one job, and that was like to at least halfway research snakes. And I get this is like the Jaws of snake world. And we all know that Jaws, was famous for not treating like sharks the way sharks would actually behave in the wild. And like the snake isn't representative of snakes. But that was just one of those things where I was like, oh, guys, come on. Like, at least I feel like if you had at least opened up in like an old world encyclopedia, that would have been covered.
Yeah, but the two professors they have with them are anthropologists.
Oh, that's the problem. They're anthropologists, not. I mean, I'm an English PhD, and I know that, but whatever. I do want to say before we keep this going that y'all had said that maybe this would be a better movie, like in different hands, and who knows in the world of Hollywood if this will happen, but there is a reboot that is apparently in the works. Like, it is going to be a proper Anaconda reboot, and it's being directed, at least now. This can change, but by Tom Gormican, who did the movie The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, which I adored that movie. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's got Nicolas Cage playing himself in the film, and it is a wonderful movie to watch. Like, it's just fun from start to finish. So, I kind of would love him to do an Anaconda reboot. I think it would be good. I really do.
I haven't seen that movie, but I've heard nothing but good things, and yeah, I'd watch it. I would watch a reboot of this movie. I don't know if I'd watch any of the sequels just because of the time period that they came out and the direct-to-video-ness of them, but I would I would watch a reboot for sure. And like I said, I've heard good things about that director. So if he does stay on and actually do this movie, that I'd be interested to see it.
Same for me, though I may at some point watch the Lake Placid Anaconda versus situation. I don't know. That sounds like just the kind of crazy creature feature that would be up my alley.
I will admit something terrible and say I've never seen any of the Lake Placid films.
Not even the original?
No. I don't know how I missed it. I really don't.
You
I'm
know, I actually
surprised.
haven't seen the original one either. We should do it sometime on No Fear.
Well, I guess that solves that.
It's almost like we're doing a series on killer animals.
I
It's almost like
know.
it would fit in really well. Well, I do want to say a few things before we talk about Lake Placid and get into that territory. There were a few things that I absolutely did adore about this film. That I agree with you, Matt. I don't think I could watch any of the sequels, especially given their like straight to video. I mean, plus this, I mean, I don't know, a sequel to a B movie just already it's where do you go really? But a few things that I adored about this movie. I did think that the animatronic snake had charm. Once you got over the fact that this wasn't going to be like the scary kind of film, I think it did have its charm. Jennifer Lopez was peak 90s in this film. When that scene where she was having to, I forget his name, but where she was having to like seduce the poacher who was holding them hostage, and John Voight's character, I guess it's he. Yeah, he is a poacher, right? Yeah. I'm still not really sure what his whole storyline was and like why he had taken them hostage and what he wanted with the snake. And I'm not even sure entirely like the background of his character either. I think he was supposed to be Cajun. Was he
No,
supposed to be Cajun?
he was Paraguayan. He said he was from Paraguay.
Oh, I was way off on that one. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I was totally flummoxed by that. Yeah.
That it was a weird accent, I will say, but the scene where Jennifer Lopez was gonna seduce him so that they could like attack him, And she stops and puts on that brown lipstick, which again was about the most 90s thing I've ever seen. And it just, I love seeing that. Owen Wilson was a fun character in this. And I loved watching Ice Cube. Ice Cube was hands down my favorite character in this. And I thought it was a wonderful, like, I don't know if bookend's the right thing, but given that we had just talked about Cocaine Bear with his son in it, that was a lot of fun. I think this whole animal horror, it works well in that family.
I thought it was interesting that his character had radio reception in the middle of the Amazon. That was odd. I hope it was a tape, but he said it was a radio.
Oh, did he? I missed that part. I just assumed it was like a tape or a CD he was
Well,
playing.
I had subtitles on at the same time, and that said radio, and it sounded like that's what he said, but maybe the subtitles led me to think something that wasn't, because the other dude was listening to CDs. I did see that because he had a huge CD player, the 90s. Um, but yeah, it kind of looked like he was just listening to a radio. So I don't know. Maybe I misinterpreted that, but considering what we've said about this as a B movie, I'm not sure. Yes, Lisa, I agree with your points there. Also, I just want to throw out there, you were saying you don't want to watch the sequels to a B movie. We did watch all three Sharktopus movies, and we watched several multi-headed shark movies.
That was done under protest.
Well, since you brought up John Voight, can we talk about him? I, I, I get that, Lisa. You didn't even understand, like, catch his nationality, because it really is a blink and you'll miss it line. But yeah, he says that he's from Paraguay, and the entire movie he is doing pretty much like the worst Hispanic accent that you can think of. Like, it really is just like awful. And watching this in 2023, it just really, I mean, it feels akin to blackface, like he's not doing it. It doesn't seem to be as a mockery, but there was no reason for his character to be from Paraguay. There was no reason for him to speak with this accent. I get it if that was how it was originally written, but once they cast John Voight, why didn't they just change the nationality and say talk like you normally do, so it's not offensive? Uh, I don't know. It that really bothered me throughout the entire movie.
Matt, I had the same exact thought because it must have been a blink and you miss it line, because I missed that line of where he was from. Granted, I was not watching super closely the film, but I did miss it. I spent the whole movie trying to figure out where he was from and wondering why they gave him an accent at all, because you're right, for his character he doesn't need a backstory. Like, all he needs is to be this kind of bad guy poacher, so he doesn't need to do that, which makes me wonder, was it written in the script like that and then they made the weird choice to cast him, or was that something that once they cast him and he was like, oh, I've got this idea for the, I don't know, like, whose idea was it to do that? And it does feel offensive. It feels like something that I would hope would not happen in 2023. I think we know better. I'm surprised that they got away with that even back in 1997, honestly. And I'm still kind of flummoxed that he wasn't doing a Cajun accent, because I really thought that's what he was doing. And in my head, I thought, well, I guess that makes some kind of weird sense. Like, maybe he's supposed to be this Cajun guy who, became a hunter hunting like gators or something, and then somehow ended up in the Amazon and is now going after like snakes and crocodiles. Like, that's where my brain was kind of going with that. But Paraguay? I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah, his
I,
accent was unplaceable. And supposedly he was also supposed to have been a priest too. I mean, there was just so much wacky around him that needed. I wasn't even sure why it was included.
well, not just a priest, but like he had dropped out of seminary, and then there, because I remember that dialogue, and I probably remember this way longer than I should, but like because he says that he went to seminary, or that he was training to be a priest, and then left, and someone says, "So you're a failed priest?" And he looks at them and says, "No, not failed," and it's like never referenced again or brought up in any way, shape, or form. And I don't even know what that means, because if he did leave seminary, is he a priest or isn't he? The question's never answered, and it's never really even answered as to why this was brought up in the first place. And like, yeah, I agree. His accent is muddled, is how I would describe it. Like it's muddled.
I also was kind of, I don't know what the word is. I found it problematic. I was a little disturbed too by like the reason that they were going into the jungle too. I mean, they're going to like try to like become famous, I guess, through capturing film of like a secretive Amazonian tribe. That in itself, like that frame story kind of bothered me a bit. And it also seemed to be like just shoehorned in, because it's like they start out that way and then that gets kind of lost, but it's still attached because those people worship snakes according to this weird Paraguayan failed priest. And then the end they pop up, but there's no reason. They're silent, and I don't know. It was just problematic. I guess that's the only way to describe it. I was just like, why? Why is, I mean, I guess they felt like they had to have a reason to go in, but it seemed like a kind of cliche to put them out there so they could be attacked by the snake, and to give John Voight's character more weirdly culturally inappropriate and correct like things to become an expert on. It was just a hodgepodge of stuff.
Yeah, for a movie about a snake killing people, there was a lot going on. And I guess I keep comparing it to Jaws because that seems to be kind of the gold standard, I think, for these kind of films, these kind of like animal attack films. But I mean, and Jaws had several storylines, most famously, the mayor kind of shutting down or not shutting down the beach, and, showing the corruptness of the government there and the leaders in charge. And it almost feels like somebody wanted to do something like that with this film by including all these other things. But I don't know. I keep going back to this, but I would love to know more about the writing of this film. Like how many how many versions of a script did they go through? And because there were so many just weird additions that really didn't need to be there, or didn't connect, or didn't pan out in the way you thought they would. It was, I don't know. It's really interesting. Doesn't mean it's not enjoyable. It's just strange.
Well, and I think you make a good point that maybe we should mention here, that yeah, all of these contradictions and weirdness things don't mean that the movie is not enjoyable. I enjoyed watching it. I really did. But I definitely watched it with like one eyebrow kind of raised for most of it, going, huh? Or what? Or why? But yeah, I mean, I did enjoy watching the movie, and I mean, it's a 90-minute movie. It is not long by any means, and it doesn't feel long. It doesn't really drag. I think you're right that it does take a while for the monster to appear, but that I almost want to call that like 90s pacing, because that seems like a lot of 90s movies would do that sort of thing, where they'd have this long exposition at the beginning to introduce the characters that are going to be killed. One thing that I guess did bother me some, and I know I'm gonna just start out by saying I realize that I'm wrong to do this, but I'm applying a little bit of realism to the movie because, well, like you said, Lisa, earlier, that like they had one job, which is to be semi knowledgeable about snakes. And to my knowledge, constrictors, one, it takes them a while to fully swallow what they're eating. Like they don't just like gulp it down. Like it takes hours to all get it all the way in. And two, when they do that, they don't eat again for a while because they eat something gigantic and they're digesting it for a good long while. It's like, you have a very, very big Thanksgiving lunch and you may not have dinner that night because you're still full. I didn't understand the reason why this snake was attacking them. It's mentioned with this tribe that worships them. So there is some semi mystical thing there. They they do establish that they've gone into this area after breaking through a barricade that's filled with baby anacondas. So I mean, it's like it's grounds, like hunting grounds or whatever, but none of that's ever clearly stated. Like they never say, oh, they're trespassing on its territory, so it's attacking more out of territory than for eating purposes. It's just killing them. And I mean, these are things that could really easily be fixed with like one or two lines of dialogue. Like these these snakes are very territorial. Boom, done. I mean, maybe something a little longer than that, but you know what I mean. Like, it just felt like so much of this movie is gestures towards things that really could have been expanded and explained just a little bit further, and it would have really raised up the quality of it.
I wondered that too, because yeah, you're right. There really wasn't an explanation for being attacked, other than maybe they went through the wall and they were in a place they shouldn't be. But it's like, is it movement in the water? Because Mateo gets killed when they're trying to go back and forth between the poacher's crashed up boat and their boat. Is it the fact that Cerrone, or whatever his name is, the evil guy, is trying to bait it by throwing stuff in the water off of the winch, almost like a Jaws type thing? So it comes after that. Is it like Lisa said earlier? It has emotions and it ultimately just kind of gets mad. And also, I there's at least two snakes because they shoot one in the head and then they get attacked when they go further down. Somehow they go up on they run aground and then somehow get off of it and they keep going into a different part of the jungle. And then they tangle with another snake that maybe was bigger. It's hard to tell. Yeah, it's very confused as to why the snake is bothering them. And yeah, the eating, they try to explain with the crawl at the top of the movie that Anaconda, when they're riled up, will regurgitate something to eat something else, which I guess is then a handy way to regurgitate the evil guy so he can wink at Jennifer Lopez. That was very confused. I mean, still, I had fun watching this. I mean, it was completely preposterous, but like we needed some more information. But I don't know. I mean, we didn't have any snake scientists on this trip, so maybe we were just left to like figure it out ourselves. I don't know.
Well, Mel, you brought up a really good question too that I had. How many snakes were there, like trying to eat people? Because they, at the waterfall, they shoot it in the head repeatedly, and it like lets one of the, I think it was Ice Cube, lets them go, presumably is dead, and then they stop a little further down river at a place that looks abandoned and attacked because they think there's fuel, and then there's the anaconda's back, but it has no markings on its head to indicate that it's been shot in the face several times. So like, was it a whole new snake or was it the same one? Like they never even answered that, and that was something that really, yeah, like, how many are there? Is this a different snake or the same one? Like, I don't even know. I don't have an answer.
I thought it was different snakes simply because the head wasn't wounded. But yeah, I mean, there's nothing to tell us that is or it isn't. I mean, the John Boyce character got so mad because she shot the snake in the head because he wanted to get it like unscathed or whatever. And then he sets a trap like he knows there was another one. I don't know. It was really confusing. I feel like there were at least two, maybe even three, but there was the same one that ate Owen Wilson, and we saw his screaming face through its skin, and then went after them again to try to eat someone else. Which, like you were saying, Matt, you would think that that would not be scientifically plausible. I feel like that was the same one. So we did have one snake eating or trying to eat multiple people. Still not quite an explanation why.
I guess it's implied by the movie that it's the same snake multiple times, but maybe the one that ate Owen Wilson, maybe it is a different snake from the one at the waterfall. That's entirely possible. And I just didn't even think of it that way. And
That could be, yeah.
just as a side note, Owen Wilson's screaming CGI face from inside the snake is probably my favorite shot of the entire movie, like hands down.
Mine too. I That was a great touch. That, and I think another one was when it got the guy that was falling off the waterfall somehow by crawling on the rocks and then the tree. I wasn't sure exactly. I watched it twice and I still wasn't quite sure exactly how it all went down, but yeah, catching him in midair was impressive.
Yeah, that snake had a certain level of plot armor where it was able to be bigger or smaller depending on the scene that was needed. Even that one scene at the waterfall, like it seemed like it changed its size several times.
Okay, so I feel like the more we talk about this movie, the more questions we have about all the wild things that were being strung together. And I just want to reiterate what Lisa and Matt said earlier, that just because we are finding these holes doesn't mean we don't like this movie as a B movie or B creature feature. I think we probably ought to call our discussion there. Listeners, I talked a little bit about the end, but if you have not seen Anaconda or it's been a while and you want to rewatch it, we will leave all the details of the convoluted climax of the movie to you to discover for the first time or rediscover if you decide to watch this movie with some friends and chuckle over it. So, with that, we really hope you're enjoying our series on animals and horror so far. We're at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram, and we have a Facebook page. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we are doing, please consider supporting us on Patreon. We hit pause on our Patreon mini episodes for a bit, but we have an entire kind of back catalog of extra mini episodes that you can listen to for a monthly kind of subscription, basically. If that is not an option for you financially and you would still like to support us, simply rate and review us, or tell a friend if you think they might like this podcast. That's entirely free and it helps other listeners find us. Theme music by Nicholas Gasparini.